There's a reason why traditional Malaysian homes have thorny bushes planted beneath bedroom windows, why pregnant women are told never to hang laundry outside after sunset, why certain hostels in Kuala Lumpur have rooms that are always marked as maintenance but never seem to get repaired. The Penanggalan doesn't knock. It doesn't need to. It detaches from its host body and floats through the night, trailing organs and searching for specific prey. And in the modern world, budget hostels with their thin walls and shared bathrooms have become hunting grounds. Tonight, I'm sharing 3 encounters from Malaysia's backpacker circuit. Each one involves solo travelers who thought they'd found a good deal on accommodation. Each one learned why some rooms are cheap for reasons that aren't listed on booking websites. Before we begin, if you're currently staying in a Malaysian hostel, check your room's previous reviews. Look for comments mentioning strange sounds or sleepless nights, because what backpackers dismiss as party noise might be something else entirely, something that's been hunting in these neighborhoods for generations and has learned to adapt to modern prey. Story 1: The Chinatown Booking. Jake Morrison still sleeps with the lights on, not all of them, just enough to eliminate complete darkness in any room he occupies. He told me this detail first when we spoke, before he even mentioned Malaysia or what happened in that Chinatown hostel, as if the darkness itself had become his primary concern. Jake was 22, halfway through a gap year across Southeast Asia, when he arrived in Kuala Lumpur on a budget that demanded careful choices. The hostel he found on Petaling Street advertised clean sheets, air conditioning, and rates that seemed too good for the location. The photos showed typical backpacker accommodation: bunk beds, shared bathrooms, common areas filled with travelers comparing stories. What the photos didn't show were the iron bars on every window, or the fact that certain rooms were never photographed for the website. Jake booked online from a cafe in Penang, selecting a single private room for 2 nights. When he arrived at reception, the young Malaysian woman behind the desk seemed surprised by his reservation. "Room 12, she said, checking her computer twice. "You requested specifically for alone?" "Yeah, just me. Is there a problem?" She printed his keycard without answering, but Jake noticed she avoided eye contact. The lobby smelled like incense and something else, something organic and sweet that reminded him of overripe fruit. Room 12 was on the 2nd floor, at the end of a corridor lined with traditional shophouse windows. The room itself was exactly as advertised: single bed, small desk, private bathroom, and air conditioning that actually worked. Jake had stayed in worse places, but the window bothered him. Iron bars, yes, but also something else. Thorny vines had been deliberately planted in window boxes just outside, creating a barrier of razor-sharp spikes. When Jake asked about them during check-in, the receptionist had simply said, "For security." That first night, Jake fell asleep easily. The jet lag from his flight and the humidity had exhausted him completely. He woke around 3:30 a.m. to the sound of scratching against his window. Probably cats, he thought. Malaysian street cats were everywhere, and they'd climb anything for food or shelter. But when he looked outside, the alley below was empty. The scratching continued, deliberate, rhythmic, like fingernails against glass. Jake turned on his phone's flashlight and pointed it toward the window. Nothing there, just the iron bars and the thorny vines swaying slightly in air that felt perfectly still. The scratching stopped immediately. He went back to sleep, dismissing it as urban wildlife. Old buildings made noise. Travel fatigue played tricks on perception. Completely rational explanations. The second night, Jake woke to the same sound, but this time it was accompanied by something else. Whispering. A woman's voice speaking what sounded like Malay, too soft to understand but clear enough to be human. Jake sat up in bed, fully alert. The voice was coming from directly outside his window, but that was impossible. His room was on the second floor, and there was no fire escape or ledge that could support a person. He approached the window carefully, phone light ready. The bars were secure, the thorny vines undisturbed. But now he could smell something new mixing with the incense from downstairs, something metallic and organic, like raw meat left in heat. "Hello?" he called out softly. The whispering stopped. In the sudden silence, Jake heard something that made his stomach drop. Breathing. Slow, deliberate breaths coming from just outside the glass, as if someone was floating there in empty air. He aimed his phone light directly at the source of the sound. For just a moment, he saw something that his brain couldn't immediately process. A woman's face, but wrong. Floating without a body, hair streaming around it, like it was underwater. Eyes that reflected light, like an animal's. Jake stumbled backward, dropping his phone. When he retrieved it and looked again, nothing was there, but the breathing continued, slow, patient, like someone waiting for an invitation. Jake didn't sleep for the rest of the night. He sat on his bed, back against the wall, watching the window until dawn. The breathing stopped exactly at sunrise, cut off abruptly like someone had flipped a switch. At checkout, the receptionist asked how he'd slept. "Fine," Jake lied. She nodded, but her expression suggested she knew better. "Room 12 is difficult sometimes. Previous guests mentioned strange dreams. Why don't you warn people? Would you have stayed if we did?" Jake left immediately after checking out, but curiosity made him research the building's history. The hostel occupied a renovated 1920s shop house that had served multiple purposes over the decades. During World War II, it had been a maternity clinic. Records showed several deaths during difficult births, but the details were vague. More interesting were the recent reviews he found buried in travel forums. Other solo travelers mentioning sleepless nights in room 12, complaints about construction noise, and inconsiderate guests making noise outside windows. All reviews carefully avoided mentioning anything supernatural, but the patterns were clear. Jake also discovered something else. Traditional Malaysian architecture deliberately incorporated thorny plants around windows for protection against Penanggalan, detached vampiric spirits that hunt pregnant women and newborns. The thorns were meant to catch and tear the trailing organs that followed the floating head. The hostel's iron bars weren't just security measures, they were containment. Jake never returned to Kuala Lumpur, but he keeps in touch with other backpackers through travel forums. 2 more solo travelers have reported similar experiences in room 12 since his stay. Both were moved to different rooms the following night, no questions asked. The hostel still operates. Room 12 is still available for booking, but according to recent reviews, it's never occupied for more than 1 night per guest. The thorny vines outside the window have grown significantly thicker since Jake's visit. Maintenance claims they're impossible to remove due to how deeply the roots have grown into the building's foundation. Jake's stay was recorded as 2 nights, but his bank statement shows charges for 3. He has no memory of the extra day. Story 2. The Digital Nomad's Discovery. Lisa Jiang described the sound as wet typing, fingers hitting keyboard keys that were somehow damp. She noticed it first during her 3rd week at a co-working hostel in Georgetown, Penang, where digital nomads could rent both accommodation and workspace by the month. The sound came from the computer station next to hers, always between 3 and 4 a.m. when she was the only one supposedly working. Lisa had chosen Georgetown specifically for its UNESCO heritage status and reliable internet. The hostel occupied a restored Peranakan shop house on Armenian Street, advertising itself as a modern workspace in historical surroundings. The building's architecture was typical for the area: narrow frontage, deep interior, with living spaces above the old shop level. Her monthly rental included a bunk in a 6-bed dormitory and 24-hour access to the ground floor co-working space. Most guests were short-term travelers, but a few, like Lisa, stayed for extended periods to take advantage of Malaysia's favorable exchange rates and digital nomad visa policies. The workspace was usually empty by midnight. Lisa preferred working late when the building was quiet and the internet speed improved. She'd set up her laptop at Station 7, a desk positioned near the Heritage Shop House's original wooden staircase that led to the upper floors. For the first 2 weeks, her late-night sessions were completely normal. The building settled into comfortable silence after other guests went to bed. Occasionally, she'd hear footsteps on the wooden stairs as someone used the bathroom, but these sounds were natural, expected. Then she started noticing Station 6. The computer at Station 6 was older than the others, a desktop PC instead of the modern laptops most nomads used. According to the hostel's equipment list, it was available for guests who traveled without their own devices, but Lisa had never seen anyone use it. Yet every night around 3 a.m., she'd hear typing from that direction. At first, Lisa assumed another long-term guest had a similar work schedule. The typing was rhythmic, consistent, the sound of someone who knew their way around a keyboard. But when she looked over, Station 6 was always empty. Computer screen dark, keyboard untouched. The typing would continue for exactly 37 minutes, then stop abruptly. On her 15th night, curiosity overcame politeness. When the typing started, Lisa quietly moved to Station 6 to investigate. The computer was off, but the keyboard was damp. Not wet exactly, but moist, like someone with sweaty palms had been using it extensively. She touched the spacebar. The computer powered on immediately, despite not being plugged in. The screen displayed a document in Microsoft Word, a single line of text repeated hundreds of times. She's working late again. Lisa scrolled through the document. The same sentence, page after page, typed over and over in Times New Roman font. The document properties showed it had been created at 3:03 a.m. that same night, last modified 3:33 a.m. The modification time updated as she watched, even though no one was typing. "Who's working late?" Lisa whispered to the empty room. The typing stopped immediately. In the sudden silence, she heard her own voice responding from behind her, the woman at Station 7. Lisa spun around. Station 7, her workstation, was empty. Her laptop was closed, though she distinctly remembered leaving it open. But someone was still typing. The sound came from her direction now, from her own keyboard. She approached her station carefully. Her laptop was indeed closed, but she could hear typing coming from inside it. Mechanical key presses muffled by the closed lid, as if someone was working on the keyboard despite the laptop being shut. Lisa opened her laptop. The screen was black, but the typing sounds continued. She pressed the spacebar to wake it up. Her work document was open, but there was new text she hadn't written. Lisa stays up too late. Lisa works alone. Lisa should go to bed. The sentences were appearing in real time, typed by invisible fingers. Her hands weren't touching the keyboard, but the words kept flowing across the screen. Lisa should check the room registry. Lisa should see who else lives here. Against every instinct, Lisa opened the hostel's guest registry on her browser. The current occupants list showed 12 people, including herself. But when she scrolled to Station 6, she found an entry that shouldn't exist. Maylin Tan, permanent resident, room 3B, check-in date, 1943. Room 3B was directly above the co-working space. Lisa had walked past it dozens of times. According to the hostel layout, it was a storage room, not guest accommodation. She heard footsteps on the wooden staircase, slow, deliberate steps descending from the upper floors. But the footsteps sounded wrong, too wet, like bare feet on wet wood. Lisa looked up from her laptop. A woman stood at the bottom of the stairs, wearing a white blouse and dark skirt that looked decades out of fashion. Her hair hung loose around her shoulders, and she smiled at Lisa with genuine warmth. "You work such long hours," the woman said, "just like I used to." "Are you staying here?" Lisa asked, though something in her gut already knew the answer was impossible. "Oh yes, I've been here much longer than you." The woman took a step forward, and Lisa noticed something that made her blood freeze. The woman's feet weren't touching the ground. She hovered perhaps an inch above the wooden floor, moving with perfect smoothness. "Room 3B has the best view of the street," the woman continued conversationally. "I used to watch the British soldiers march past, then the Japanese. Now I watch the travelers come and go." Lisa blinked, and the woman was gone, but the typing resumed at Station 6, faster now, more urgent. The sound echoed through the empty workspace, like someone desperately trying to finish a project before dawn. Lisa packed her laptop and went upstairs immediately. Her dormitory was full of sleeping travelers, their quiet breathing a comforting contrast to the silence below. She didn't return to the co-working space that night. The next morning, she asked at reception about room 3B. The staff member seemed confused by the question. "Storage only," he said. "Has been for many years. Very old room, not suitable for guests." But when Lisa checked the guest registry again, Maylin Tan's entry was gone. Lisa stayed at the hostel for one more week, but she never worked past midnight again. Other guests occasionally mentioned hearing late-night typing from the co-working space, but management always attributed it to the building's old wooden structure, expanding and contracting. The computer at Station 6 was removed 3 days after Lisa's encounter. Official reason: outdated equipment replacement. But the typing sounds continued, now coming from the empty desk where the computer had been. Lisa learned later that the building had indeed been a business premises during the 1940s. Not a shop, but a secretarial college where young women learned typing and bookkeeping. Records from 1943 show that Mei Lin Tan was one of 17 students who died during the Japanese occupation. She had been the most dedicated student, always stayed late to practice, always worked alone. The college closed permanently in 1944. Mei Lin Tan was 23 years old when she died. Story 3: The Heritage Inn Incident. David Park's camera equipment was expensive. Professional-grade documentation tools that he'd invested in specifically for his travel channel, devices capable of capturing 4K footage in low-light conditions. He mentioned this detail first when we spoke, emphasizing how reliable his equipment was, how impossible it would be for technical malfunctions to explain what he recorded in Malacca. David had built his YouTube channel around authentic solo travel experiences. His audience appreciated honest reviews and detailed documentation of budget accommodations across Southeast Asia. When he found the Blue Mansion Hostel in Malacca's Heritage District, it seemed perfect for content, a restored Peranakan shophouse offering authentic historical atmosphere at backpacker prices. The booking confirmation specified room 3A, a private single on the 3rd floor. The building's architecture was typical for 17th century Straits Chinese architecture, narrow street frontage expanding into deep interior spaces with ornate wooden panels and traditional blue ceramic details that photographed beautifully. David arrived in the afternoon and spent several hours setting up his equipment. 3 cameras positioned strategically around the room for comprehensive coverage, external microphones to capture authentic ambient sound, and backup batteries for overnight filming. His standard documentation protocol required at least 12 hours of footage to create a thorough review. The hostel was nearly empty. Off-season timing meant David had the 3rd floor entirely to himself, perfect for filming without disturbing other guests. The building's historical character translated well on camera. Genuine wooden floors that creaked appropriately, shuttered windows that opened onto narrow alleyways, and traditional sleeping alcoves that created interesting visual depth. That night, David began noticing sounds around 2 a.m. while reviewing footage. Footsteps in the corridor outside his room, light but persistent. Someone pacing back and forth, covering the same route repeatedly. The old wooden floors amplified every step, creating natural audio documentation of movement patterns. David checked his hallway camera. The corridor was empty, but the footsteps continued. His audio equipment was picking up the sounds clearly, definite human footsteps, moving with purpose and rhythm. At 3:33 a.m., while David was editing footage with headphones on, all 3 of his cameras simultaneously shifted focus. Not a malfunction, deliberate refocusing, as if someone had manually adjusted each device. The cameras now pointed toward corners of his room that had been dark and empty before. David removed his headphones and looked around. His room appeared unchanged, but the camera screens showed something different. In each display, additional furniture was visible. medical equipment arranged along the walls, metal basins, surgical instruments, apparatus that belonged in a hospital from decades past. But when David looked directly at those corners, he saw only empty space. "The cameras see what was here before," a woman's voice explained calmly. David spun toward the voice. A woman stood near his window, wearing a white nurse's uniform that looked authentically vintage. Her hair was pinned back in a style from the 1920s, and she held a clipboard as if she'd been taking notes. "Who are you?" David asked, keeping his camera rolling. "I used to work here. When this was the clinic, I documented everything, every birth, every death, every woman who came here hoping for help." David glanced at his camera screens. They showed him talking to empty air, but the audio was recording both sides of the conversation. This wasn't a clinic. It's a heritage building, a private residence. The woman smiled sadly. "Official records can be incomplete, especially for services that weren't entirely legal." She gestured toward the medical equipment, visible only through his cameras. 17 women died here between 1921 and 1937. Difficult births, complications, procedures that went wrong. I kept detailed records of each case. David's main camera began recording automatically, though he hadn't touched the controls. The device was documenting the conversation independently, angles shifting to follow movement he couldn't see. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you document everything, just like I used to. But some records should stay buried." The woman stepped closer, and David noticed she wasn't walking. Her feet remained several inches above the wooden floor, moving with the fluid grace of something that had forgotten how gravity worked. "The mothers who didn't survive," she continued, "they're still here, still trying to deliver, still hoping for different outcomes." David's secondary camera turned toward the window. Through its lens, he could see shapes moving in the alleyway below, figures in white gowns, pacing endlessly between the narrow walls, their movements visible only through the camera's digital display. They walk the same paths every night, searching for the babies they lost. David blinked, and the woman was gone. But his cameras continued recording, now focused on empty space where she'd been standing. The medical equipment remained visible through the displays, solid and real in the digital realm, but invisible to direct observation. He packed his equipment immediately. The cameras captured every moment of his departure, but when David reviewed the footage later, the timestamps revealed an impossible discrepancy. According to his memory, packing took nearly an hour. He distinctly remembered carefully wrapping each piece of equipment, checking his belongings methodically, ensuring nothing was forgotten. The process felt exhaustingly long, but the camera footage showed him moving in fast forward, actions blurred with unnatural speed. The entire packing sequence lasted 4 minutes and 17 seconds. David checked out at 4:17 a.m. The night staff seemed unsurprised by his early departure. Historical buildings can be intense, the receptionist said sympathetically. Many guests find the atmosphere overwhelming. Has this happened before? The third floor has particular energy. Previous guests mentioned unusually vivid dreams. David left Malacca immediately, driving through the night to reach Kuala Lumpur by dawn. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed him. His camera equipment continued malfunctioning for weeks afterward, devices turning on by themselves, footage corrupted with audio that didn't match the visual content, timestamps that made no mathematical sense. He never posted the Blue Mansion content to his travel channel. The footage remains in his private archives, filed under unexplainable incidents. But David showed me selected clips during our interview. The cameras clearly documented his conversations with empty air, recorded both sides of impossible dialogues, and captured medical equipment that architectural surveys confirmed never existed in that building. Most unsettling was the final piece of footage. As David's taxi pulled away from the hostel, his camera, still recording from the back seat, captured a figure watching from the third-floor window. A woman in a white nurse's uniform, holding a clipboard, waving goodbye with mechanical precision. David's travel channel went on indefinite hiatus after Malacca. He returned to Seoul and now works in conventional marketing, avoiding any projects related to historical documentation or heritage tourism. The Blue Mansion Hostel continues operating as boutique accommodation. Guest reviews consistently praise the historical authenticity and unique character. But solo travelers occasionally mention restless nights and unusually vivid dreams about medical procedures. Room 3A is frequently available despite high demand for heritage accommodation in Malacca's tourist district. The building's historical records confirm it served multiple purposes over the centuries. Between 1921 and 1937, unlicensed medical practitioners operated a maternity clinic on the third floor. 17 women died during childbirth there. David's footage is stored on a secure server that shows regular access from an IP address registered in Malacca. Not David's account. Someone else regularly views his unused travel content. The access logs show viewing activity every night at exactly 3:33 a.m. 3 different cities across Malaysia. 3 solo travelers who chose budget accommodation based purely on price and location. 3 people who discovered that some bargains come with costs that aren't listed in booking confirmations. Each story shares remarkable consistencies, despite the travelers never meeting or communicating. The timing, always between 3 and 4 a.m. The presence of women in vintage clothing who claimed historical connection to the buildings. Most significantly, the technological anomalies that provided documentation of encounters that shouldn't have been possible. From a psychological perspective, solo travel creates unique vulnerabilities to suggestion and hallucination. Extended isolation, unfamiliar environments, and cultural immersion can trigger powerful dissociative episodes. Jet lag and sleep deprivation compound these effects, particularly during the early morning hours when our brains are most susceptible to false awakening states. There's also Malaysia's rich folklore tradition to consider. The Penanggalan legend has adapted remarkably well to modern urban environments. Where traditional stories featured rural villages and jungle clearings, contemporary encounters occur in hostels, hotels, and heritage buildings that serve as natural hunting grounds for predatory spirits. Perhaps these incidents represent nothing more than coincidental timing combined with cultural priming and sleep-deprived perception. 3 isolated cases of travel stress manifesting through familiar, supernatural frameworks. But that explanation struggles with the technological evidence, Jake's unexplained extra day of charges. Lisa's documented conversations with invisible speakers, David's footage accessing itself from unknown IP addresses. Modern digital systems don't typically participate in psychological hallucinations. I've shared these accounts exactly as they were reported to me. 3 encounters, 3 warnings about the hidden costs of budget accommodation in Malaysia's heritage districts. Have you ever stayed alone in a Malaysian hostel and experienced something that booking sites don't prepare you for? And if you currently work in hostel management across Southeast Asia, what protocols do you have for guests who report unusual activity during their stays?